Hello and welcome to Photographic Connections, the podcast where we create connection to self, nature and others through the art of photography. My name is Kim Grant, the founder of Photographic Connections and your host for this podcast. And today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Simon Baxter onto the podcast. Simon is a woodland photographer based in England who has a very deep love with the natural world. We speak about why he enjoys spending a lot of time in one location to really get to know it before photographing it, the benefits of reconnecting with your inner child, and why he loves the challenge of photographing woodlands so much. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Simon Baxter. Hi Simon, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast this week. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you because you have such a deep connection with nature and particularly with regards to woodlands. And I'm really looking forward to delving into that with you today and really unearthing your passion and your connection to that. But before we do that, I wondered if you could go way back to the beginning of your journey and explain what got you into photography in the first place.
Oh, blimey. Yeah. Well, I guess if we're going right the way back to what got me into photography, then I've had cameras since I was about 8 years old, I guess, something like that. And I don't know what sparked the initial interest back then, but I do remember watching, this would have been early 90s, I'm guessing. There was a TV program called Wild Something or Other with Chris Packham. I don't know if you remember that. You're probably too young to remember that. But I remember, and it's the only photography TV program that I can think of. It was on Channel 4, and I remember watching that. It was placing like mirrors under mushrooms and all those kind of techniques, and that was pretty cool. So, but I've only really had a kind of casual interest since then. You know, just sort of dipping in and out of it, and you know, taking kind of better than your average holiday photographs, that kind of thing. So when I would go on a holiday, you know, rather than just snap, I'd be the person sort of sat next to the river, you know, in Wales, waiting for the salmon to jump with my arms aching, just sat there like this for hours. But then it was back in 2012 that things really changed. So that's when, which I've spoken about sort of many times before, when I hurt my back, and had to kind of give up my previous hobbies. And I still didn't kind of jump for the camera straight away. It wasn't until our dog, Meg, came into our lives in 2014, and she just changed everything, because up until that point I was very unhappy, sort of stuck in a negative thought cycle. And she got me out of that, gave me a reason to move, gave me a reason to be back outside. And obviously, I was started to photograph Meg. And then Meg in the woods, then Meg in the local viewpoints, then just the viewpoint with Meg by my side. And then it just kind of snowballed from there, really. And then as soon as I discovered woodland photography in kind of end of 2015, I would say, everything just fell into place. You know, it's just kind of, sometimes I was just extremely fortunate in a way, because I was unhappy and a lot of pain, but I felt extremely fortunate to just find something where you feel at home. And that was quite a profound experience. So, I've been pretty much addicted to it since.
I love that you speak there about photography and being in the woodlands being like home to you. It clearly has a very deep connection for you that's helped you massively. And I've actually spoken to a few people now on this podcast who have had back issues, and for them, getting out into nature and doing photography has just been incredible for them. You know, like it says, it gives you a reason to move, gives you a reason to get outdoors, gives you that connection. So yeah, it seems with you as well that getting into nature and doing photography has been really important in helping you with your back problems. Would you be happy to kind of delve in a little bit more to that and explain really, I guess, how do you feel nature and photography helps in getting you out?
God, it's such, you know, it sounds like a simple question, but it's an extremely complex subject to kind of make sense of, because it took me a while to make sense of it, actually. And that was, I think through photography, we have these kind of epiphanies. We have these moments where things change. And it's very difficult to make sense of. Whereas I'm that kind of person, where I recognize change, and I'm not happy unless I can kind of make sense of that. I want to know why something has changed, why something has improved, why something suddenly starts to make sense. And I remember a particular moment, actually, where all that, I was a very kind of superficial understanding to start with, whereby I was going out into the woods and I was aware that it was making me feel better, both physically and mentally, but I didn't know why. But obviously I just put myself in that situation as often as I possibly could. And then spring 2016, I think it was, I was in a local place. That's where I spend vast majority of my time, is local woodlands. And I was photographing a particular scene, which I'd photographed a few months earlier. And I wasn't having a good day, to be honest. I was, feeling a bit sort of sensitive, back and legs, and everything was hurting. And then I was just looking at this scene, and then suddenly felt really emotional, and quite upset. But then that's when that connection just grew, because what I realized was that the reason why I was photographing woodland, the reason why I was choosing particular subjects, was because I saw them as a reflection of myself. I just wasn't consciously aware of that before. It was just happening. Whereas all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I'm now sort of seeing this parallel between how I feel and what I'm choosing to photograph. And I just kind of went with that. And that started to kind of build, that started to develop my understanding of what an emotional connection is. Because it's a very difficult thing to explain to people. And there's a lot of people talking about this now, is emotional connection to the landscape. And I think some people, it kind of scares them a bit, because they don't necessarily understand what you're talking about. It's like, well, I've not had a profound experience. I just like going out taking pictures, or they don't really understand what their own emotional connection is. So I think, when you start to break it down, it can be a number of different things. It's noticing, spending that time just to not just see things as merely nothing more than a photographic subject, and to kind of disconnect yourself from, the fun of using a new gadget, and just look and observe and notice. And then that slowly develops into then understanding. So you're seeing things, and then you start to kind of get a grasp of why something looks like that, why something behaves like that, the seasonal changes, the nature's rhythms, etc. And then that kind of evolves into caring. And then you start to kind of, yes, you understand these things, and because you understand them, you start to care about them. And that kind of starts to deepen the connection even more. And it just never ends, because you learn a little bit more, then a little bit more. And the more that knowledge deepens, the richer the experience gets, and the more you love it even more. And then sometimes you forget that you're even taking photographs, or you should be taking photographs, because you're just enjoying being there too much. And I do that all the time. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot I had a camera on my back. So yeah, it's a special thing, and it's kind of one of those, it feels like a magic ingredient. And when you discover something like that, obviously there's a desire to share that, because perhaps other people will benefit from it too, in the same way that I have, or you have, or others have experienced and talk about.
It's interesting. I think as humans, we always want to rationalise things, don't we? And I mean, I've been doing photography now for almost 15 years. And I remember in the beginning, I really saw it as like this technical pursuit. And it was all about thinking about, going out there with the gear and using the gear to create an image. But for me, deep inside, it's always been an emotional thing. Like, I used to go down to the beach a lot when I was a teenager, and I was in a very dark place myself. And it was going to the beach most evenings and using the sunset and the light without my camera before I got into photography to kind of channel my emotions and give me a release. And then it was through doing that I then got into photography. And that emotional element has always been present for me. But I didn't
Absolutely.
really acknowledge it, I guess, in the beginning, because I kept thinking about the technical aspect of photography. But as you kind of rightly said there, a lot of people now are speaking about this emotional connection. I find that photographers are really in tune with what they're photographing, and some of the most incredible images come from a deep emotional place. And that's something that you're very good at coming across in your images. Like when you look at your woodland photographs, you can see the time, the effort, the emotional connection that comes from them. And I think one thing that's really beautiful is that you regularly see characters and, you know, almost like people and the aliveness of the woodlands. So when you're in the woodlands, how do you feel? What did you think it does for you that allows you to have that connection and see that human element, I guess, of yourself reflected back in the trees that surround you?
Well, one of the most powerful things, I think, which all helps with the mental well-being benefits, you know, the freely available therapeutic benefits of being in nature. And it's something that I've sort of started to discuss more in kind of presentations as well, is reverting you to that childlike state of imagination. Because it all depends upon, it's amazing actually, when you really, really think about it, the parallels with all the things that you've done and the things that you've experienced when you were young. So when I think about how I pursued completely different hobbies in the past, and I can see just my kind of personality going into all these different things, and you sort of see the synergy between all of them. And when I was younger, I used to go out into the woods a lot with friends, and we just used to mess around and be kids and just do stupid things as you do as your kids, but it was always in that kind of woodland environment. And I guess I was just reverted back to that when in the woods. And obviously, you know, watching films such as Lord of the Rings and Avatar, and, you know, reading books and things like that, I think I'm that type of person. When I go in, I'm just reminded of these stories, reminded of the adventures when you were young, when you are more imaginative, and it reverts you back to that childlike state. And I guess why that's powerful, I guess it's a form of escapism, in a way, because if you're thinking like a kid, then you're not stressing over everyday life, you know, paying the mortgage and things like that. And it's when you don't know, it's when you don't try and it's effortless. You just walk in and you don't realize you've been distracted, but that's when you know that you're truly distracted and you're immersed. And I think that sense of immersion is what's crucial. I think, you know, true immersion, you can't force that. It either happens or it doesn't. But that's where you really start to kind of feel those benefits, because that's what my profound experience was because the thing that dominated my thought process for years was pain. And being out in the woods was the first thing that genuinely broke that cycle. But I didn't realize it had happened until about an hour later. I was like, oh my God, this thing that's dominated my mind, I've just realized I've not been. So in that moment, I was then thinking about it again, but I realized that, you know, something very special had happened. So I wanted to repeat that. And the other thing about that childlike state of imagination is that when you're behaving like that, you notice things, because like kids do when they're growing up, even very young little toddlers, you can see it. They're just looking everywhere and their eyes are wide open and they're noticing all the different things that are going on and trying to make sense of the world. And that's what it's like in the woods. There's a lot of complexity. So you're looking around just trying to make sense of it. And that's the best thing to do, because then you see how everything works in the woodland as a whole, as a community, if you like. Rather than that subject-driven approach of, I'm going for a particular tree, I'm going for a particular scene. It's just, well, let's just connect with what this place is about. What's the character about? What's the unique features of this particular woodland that you want to translate in your photographs? And then when you do make a photograph, it isn't just a tree. It's all the other little bits that have a part to play in that scene as well. You know, so... I mean, it keeps going and going. You can then sort of feed ecology into this as well, and science. But yeah, Sorry, I am going. I told you I'd go off on tangents.
No, I love it. I love it because you bring so much into your work, and you can really see that when you watch your videos. Like you just mentioned there, the ecology element as well, and you can see that you really kind of go out your way to learn about the environment you're photographing, learn kind of what it is visually, but also learn kind of what's going on, like you say, from a scientific perspective, feeling into how it works for you. And I love how you went back there to that childlike state, because I think I'm starting to feel like our whole lives, our adult lives, are about kind of forgetting about that childlike state and then spending our whole adult lives trying to get back to it, because we realise there's a release in that and a letting go in that. I think it was beautiful there as well that you mentioned that, you know, your life there was this cycle of pain. And by going out into the woodlands and doing photography, you were breaking that cycle. It was almost like that mental cycle was broken and you were doing something different. And that's one thing they say, isn't it? That insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It's kind of going out and changing that perspective. So, I think... Like, I love that you spoke there about that immersion as well in the woodlands. And that's something I think is quite clear with you is when you go into a woodland, often you can spend a number of days in a single location just getting to know it, or you earmark a lot of like woodlands near you, don't you? And then you go back in kind of optimum conditions. So you put a lot of thought and sort of planning and really feeling in and understanding a location before you actually get those images that everybody that you share with everybody, don't you? So your process is kind of very meticulous and very thoughtful in many respects. I wondered if you could kind of go into that a little bit and speak a bit about that process and that connection and how you go about that.
It's I am a perfectionist through and through to the point where it's very difficult getting the balance, because it can be absolutely crippling. Because I do have much better balance now. Before, there used to be a time where things weren't working out and I would get really agitated. Whereas now it's just a case of, like you said, being meticulous, and part of that, it's an interesting combination actually, isn't it? Because there's been meticulous, methodical, there's been technical, and then running alongside that is all the other kind of things that are very difficult to measure, such as the emotion and the connection and the immersion. But those two things are always working in tandem. And it's the balance between those two things which is really difficult to manage. It's essentially that. I get super excited when I go into a new location. If I can just sense that there's potential there, I get very excited. So it becomes almost like a mission. I feel like an obligation to do that place justice. That's kind of what it's about, really. If I feel like somewhere is special in terms of ecologically special, aesthetically special, especially in terms of how it makes me feel, then I feel an obligation to make images which translate that, which do it justice. And the only way you can do that is to put in that time and effort, that groundwork to get to know it. You can't just walk into a place and expect to suddenly make great images. If you're very fortunate and you come across great scenes and the conditions are good, you might get some great images. But at the same time, they don't necessarily speak for that place. So that's what I did in Scotland quite recently. I intended to kind of go around trying to find different places. I spent almost all week in one tiny little place. And I absolutely loved it. And I didn't get many images which I would kind of call portfolio work. And I spent a lot of time wandering around without the camera. And that's a crucial part of the process. That's the other thing as well to kind of add into this mix is social media. And as content creators, we have to feed the beast, putting out YouTube videos, posting on Instagram, etc. I genuinely try to disconnect myself from that, because if I worry too much about that when I'm out making images, it will absolutely get in the way. So if I know that I have to make videos because it's been months since I've made one, then I kind of split the time to like 50-50. Like 50% of the time I'm enjoying this and it's just me. Another 50% of the time I'm making videos. But if I give myself that time just for me, then making the videos becomes easier.
I think it's lovely. I think we all have our own processes, don't we? And I love listening to people speaking about their processes, because I love that you intended to go around all these places in Scotland recently and you ended up spending most of your time in one woodland, because I think it really shows how important it is for you to really connect to that place and really get to know it and really understand it. And when we are kind of flying all over the place or traveling all over the place and driving all over the place, going to different places, we can feel quite fragmented. Like, I'm starting to realise that in what I do. Like, you know, for so many years I was kind of travelling around Scotland, seeing all these different places, but you were only getting like a day or so in each location, then you were moving on. And I never felt grounded. I never felt like you kind of say you could do it justice. And this kind of last year, I've spent so much time just in my local area without travelling, and I'm producing now what I feel is some of the best images I've ever taken, because I'm connecting with somewhere that I'm, you know, love, I'm connected to, I know really well, and it's now kind of rubbing off in what I'm doing. And I love that you have that almost process as well, because I think, especially as quite sensitive, emotional people, we need to get to a location to kind of ground ourselves and, you know, get to know it in and out. And understand it. And I think especially woodlands, like, I find woodlands incredibly therapeutic to walk around and connect with, but very, very challenging to photograph. And I think that's where you've almost mastered it, is you've given yourself the time to connect with it, to understand it, to get to know it, so that you can then produce these images. Because I think woodland out of every landscape is probably arguably the most challenging and the most time consuming, because you really have to get to know it, don't you? Yeah,
absolutely. But that's again, look, you know, going back to what I said about parallels between hobbies of the past. So I used to do freshwater fishing, and I would go to the most secluded lakes with the most difficult to catch fish because it was the process that I enjoyed the most. So the fact that I could be at a lake and have it to myself, knowing that there was maybe only half a dozen of these, you know, beautiful wild carp in there, that I might catch one a year, something like that. And that was as a young teenager as well. That was my kind of approach. But when you made contact and you did catch that fish, then, you know, yes, I kind of question the merits of dragging, you know, fish out of their nice, peaceful home these days. But at the time, I still felt as if I cared about them. And I really appreciated the reward of kind of holding this fish that I've worked really hard to catch. And it was the same when I rode a bike. I would ride the most difficult to ride trails until I could ride them easily. And I remember when it used to start and snow and there'd be like a blizzard on the moors. My friend would turn his phone off because he knew I'd be messaging him saying, "Let's go out mountain biking." He thought I was crazy. But it was always that. It was always just that sense of satisfaction, that deep, deep sense of fulfillment from having gone through something challenging and got the result. And that's what it's like with woodland. I just love the fact that it's so complex and difficult sometimes. And those are some of the most satisfying images are actually probably the ones which don't do very well on somewhere like Instagram because they're a bit too complex. But you see them printed and they look wonderful because all of a sudden all that detail and texture and very subtle layers of light and shadow and colour, it just comes to life. And it's the images that come easily. They're almost like, I think they can't be very good. It was just too easy. I just walked up and took a picture. I just love kind of meticulously working through a scene to kind of get everything in balance. And it does. That's kind of part of the immersion as well, is just getting lost in that complexity. And the worst thing that can happen is that you get frustrated with it. And I've heard that a lot. People just get frustrated with it because they might be trying for weeks and weeks and not make an image. And so, well, what's the consequence to not making an image? Did you enjoy being out? Did you enjoy the practice of photography? If so, it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned, because you have that, it's a mindset, isn't it? You know, you have that approach of, I'm just going out there to enjoy nature. I just happen to have a camera with me. I think you're more likely to see something and make good images. Eradicating frustration was one of the best things that I did several years ago.
That's a beautiful process to have there, because I think, especially when it comes to expectations, a lot of people expect to get images every time they go out, or most of the time, and especially with a genre like woodland. I mean, that's not. I mean, you could do a lot of different things. You go into macro and all sorts of stuff, and there's always opportunities. I always say there's always something you can photograph. But as you say there, the process, it's what is it doing for you in that moment? It's getting you out. It's connecting you. It's helping you relax. It's helping you unwind. It's helping you switch off. And arguably, that's more important than the final image. The final image is just like a bonus. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. And I guess you can really see that in many of the stuff that you've done. And then throughout all of the years that you've been doing this, recently you had the gorgeous Woodland Sanctuary exhibition with Joe Cornish, which I'm guessing must have taken you quite a number of years to build up a portfolio of images that you were satisfied with enough to create this beautiful exhibition.
Yes. That was an absolute, the highlight of my career so far. It was a wonderful experience, and particularly to do it with Joe as well, who's just, vastly experienced and just a really nice guy and just brilliant to talk to, very inspiring just to have conversation with. And he lives only 10 minutes around the corner as well. So it made kind of the organisation and putting things together, logistically quite simple. But yeah, I think my oldest image in the exhibition was about 6 years old, something like that. Joe's obviously been a photographer a lot longer than I have, but he's not really done a great deal of woodland photography up until more recent years. So I think he kind of started to get a bit more into it about 18 months after I did. And that's kind of how we connected, really, was that he started to pay more interest in the woods. He'd seen some of my work, and then we started to have like a bit of the odd excursion. And we realised that we had sort of very similar values and sort of sensibilities. And when we went out with our cameras, we'd walk into the woods and then we'd just part, because we just wanted to be on our own and do our thing, which was great, because then we'd meet again a few hours later and just sort of compare notes. And then he came to me with the idea because he has connections within the national park, and the gallery was within the national park. And I was just jumped at the chance. I was like, definitely want to do this exhibition. And particularly with his experience in printing as well. We did all the printing ourselves from Joe's office. Prints up to 5 feet wide, I think it was. So yeah, it was a real good mix. But what was really quite special was that every single image was local. It was all from within the national park. And we did an even split, I think it was about 30 odd images each. And the main focus of it was to communicate some different aspects of the woods. It wasn't just a case of cherry picking our best images. It was like, come up with the themes, decide what we want to say, what we want to communicate, what we want to share, what we want to celebrate. And then we picked images to fit within that narrative. And that worked really, really well, because it meant that the kind of sum of everything said something more than, it wasn't just a case of here's some nice images. It actually said something about the woodlands. It said something about trees. It said something about, our own personal connection, but the way that, lots of people view trees as well. So it was a beautiful thing to do. But when it finished, I was just like, oh, bloody hell, what do I do now? It was really difficult to adjust after when it finished, really difficult. Yeah.
I can imagine it takes a lot out of you to do something like that, in a very, very good way, of course. But yeah, it must have consumed you for quite a while. And I think it's lovely because photography in many respects is such a solitary kind of endeavour, especially us that do our outdoor kind of stuff. And I think it's really lovely when you can meet somebody who has such a similar shared interest in you, and the fact that you were able to go out together. I think it's lovely when you have somebody that you can do that with. And like you say, you both allow each other that space to connect and photograph what's interesting you, and then just having somebody to come back to at the end and chat with, and then go on to do something like this. I think I'm starting to realise that act of almost collaboration and finding people that have a very similar thought process and stuff as we do is really important, actually, because it can be quite difficult when you're out there on your own quite a lot, and it's nice to have that connection. So I think it's beautiful that you guys were able to produce that. And I loved, like, when you look at the photographs of how the gallery was set up, and there was even the wooden beams and everything in it, and it all tied in. The whole room looked like it was set up especially for your exhibition.
Yeah, well, we had the frames made especially from it was solid ash wood, no glazing, just very minimal materials, but they were made specifically for us, and it just sat very, very well within the space. But you're exactly right with what you were saying about collaboration, because up until that point, again, I was like you said, so many of us very solitary. When I started, I just wanted to be in the woods on my own. It was all part of the process of escaping. Was just, enjoying the privilege of nature on your own, because it can be quite difficult to find sometimes for some people, depending on where you live. So the idea of working on a project with somebody else was quite daunting, but just after it, I was just, wow, there's a huge amount of value in this. Just to kind of bounce ideas off each other, to have that sounding board, but also so that you didn't dwell on things that didn't need to, because I'm very bad for agonizing over the small things. And Joe knows that I'm like that, whereas he's, quite experienced, very, very experienced, and what's the right word for it? Pragmatic. He's much more pragmatic than I am. And so when I was stressing all these little things, he was just like, Sam, chill out. It's fine. It's going to be great. So it was good just to have that reassurance. But also, if I was doing an exhibition on my own, trying to choose the images would be a nightmare. Just like when I was choosing the images for my book, you just backwards, forwards. Whereas what we did was we both made our shortlists, and then Joe said, right, I'm going to pick your images and you're going to pick mine. I was like, really? But we did, and it worked out absolutely fine. There wasn't any swearing or anything like that. Have you seen Father Ted and the Song for Ireland? Have you seen that comedy program?
Haven't. No.
No, right, okay. Well, they're just like chain smoking and swearing at each other, and they're all going mad. But I thought we were going to have a scene like that. I'm sure there'll be some people watching this that will know what I'm talking about. But no, it was very civilized, and I think we only had one or two images where we're like, I really want that one in, and we're kind of okay. If you feel strongly about a particular image, then we'll include that. But it was a good way of doing it, because take that emotional aspect out, because sometimes you have to be objective, and then to have that somebody to work with makes it much easier to be objective.
It must also be quite interesting as well to see what somebody else sees in your images. Obviously you have your short list of your favourite images there, and actually to discuss that with somebody, and you've got, like you say, your emotional connection to it. You were there when it happened, what you were trying to portray, but then to actually have somebody else's, that's somebody that you trust, of course, and has a similar view to you, to give you that sounding board, it's brilliant. And I think it's great that you guys live 10 minutes down the road from each other as well. It was almost like you were just meant to meet and put this together.
It was cool, actually, because I look at some of Joe's images and I'm picking out things, and I'm just laughing because I remember picking out a figure in one of his images, and he just turned around and he said, "What on earth goes on in your head?" I don't know. It concerns me as well.
I think a great thing that you do as well is you like to kind of give back to the environment that inspires you so much. And one thing I did a lot when I was leaving nursing and trying to get into some sort of outdoor creative pursuit was I did a little bit of voluntary work with Trees for Life. And I love that you always have this partnership with them, don't you, where you've got Meg's Grove, where people can kind of donate money, can't they? And they're planting all those trees. How did that come about?
That's a good question. I can't actually remember what just sparked the idea. I honestly can't. I probably just felt as if, I've been a beneficiary of like we all have, of nature. It's that, nature's gift. It's as simple as that. And I probably just felt compelled to give something back. You just think, this has changed my life. Would I go back to being a website developer and, riding my mountain bike and be pain-free? Probably not, because I genuinely, even though, I have challenges every day with sitting at the desk, like I said to you, I'm terrible at replying to messages. I'm, pretty bad with emails as well, because I'm constantly avoiding desk time. And part of that is avoiding using the phone too much as well. So yeah, I have my challenges every day, but I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't just get rid of the pain tomorrow, because I feel as if I'm a better, more rounded person now because of photography and because of nature, but also because of the people that I've met as a result. Because prior to this, I was quite insular in a way. It's that kind of small town thinking, shrinking horizons, because I was a website developer, working remotely, self-employed, didn't even see clients face to face. And it wasn't good in a way. I can see that now. Whereas now I meet clients from different countries, different backgrounds, different cultures, all that challenge my own way of thinking, or teach me something about nature, or teach me something about creativity, and it broadens your horizons. And it has. It's changed me for the better, and I couldn't possibly go back now. I really couldn't. And that's another way that photography and pursuing it in a very personal way. It's where it has those benefits, which the biggest surprise, I think.
Definitely, and it's great. I feel that you're able to give something back there as well with what you've done with that partnership, and in many respects too, because of course it's a part of Scotland that you've been to many times as well to create your images. And I love that you spoke there about how photography's really kind of brought you out and helped you connect with different people and people from different cultures and all over the world, and given you that much more open mindset. Because I can totally relate to that. Before I got into photography, I was very much like stuck in my little insular bubble, going to the hospital most days to work, very sucked into this difficult environment, I guess, that was very stressful, there was a lot of negativity, a lot of, you were kind of very shut off from the rest of the world. And photography has just massively opened that up for me. And of course, YouTube's been a huge thing for that. And, of course, you've got your YouTube channel as well. So what made you decide, I guess, in the beginning to start photography and to begin sharing your journey with the world? To start YouTube, and begin to share your journey with the world.
YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah, that took some doing to get started. Pluck up the courage for that one. Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because I remember reading quite a very kind of negative comment on social media once, saying, there's all these people on YouTube talking about being an introvert. They're all full of rubbish, because how can you possibly be an introvert and talk so confidently to a camera? And I thought, you have no idea, absolutely no idea, because that's at the time I got to know Thomas Heaton, and so going back quite a few years ago now, or more than 6 years ago when I first met him, and he was as quiet as a mouse. He was so shy and so kind of, it was like he was scared he was going to say the wrong thing, so it's best not to just say anything at all. So it's been really interesting to see him grow, but if you were to put him on his own in front of a camera, he was absolutely fine. Put him in a social situation, it was very, 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 very different. And I'd kind of gone like that as well. I used to have more confidence, but because of everything that had happened with my back, that I'd lost that, and I became, introverted, insular, didn't want to be around people. So starting on YouTube was quite a challenge, but then you realise that actually it is easier talking to a camera than talking to other people, and I was surprised how easy it came. And with time it gets easier and easier, and you get a bit more sort of polished in your presentation. But I remember going out into the woods, and I was just talking to my phone camera, I thought, right, I'm just going to practice. I'm going to record myself, watch it back, and then see what words I'm constantly repeating, seeing if I'm waffling. And there was a lot of that. There was a lot of waffle. You think you've talked for 2 minutes and you realise it's been 20. Well, this is going to need some practice. I remember speaking to Tom, because it was Tom that said to me, start a YouTube channel. And he said, but don't pigeonhole yourself to woodland photography. He says, because people want to see a variety. And I said, but that's what I do. That's where my voice is. That's where I've got something to say. If I'm going to do this, it has to be who I am, which is just me in the local woods with my dog. It's as simple as that. But in typical fashion, I thought, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it properly. So bought my vlogging cam. Still had some money left from when I was running my website development business. So I bought my vlogging cam, bought a drone straight away, and just went out and tried to make my first video as best as it could be at that time. And it just, I was very fortunate. It was kind of at that time where I think it was just a bit easier, and just gained traction quite quickly for that first. And I think the first video is still my most viewed video from all of them still.
Wow.
I've not had any videos with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views. That's not happened for me. But yeah, that video is quite special in that way. It's a little bit more kind of rough around the edges in terms of commentary, but it was kind of, it really sort of set the foundation for everything. And there was no sort of turning back then. But did I have any commercial aspirations or anything like that to start with? Not that I was aware of, because if you were to say, right, what's the formula for being commercially successful as a photographer? Start a YouTube channel, go to Iceland, go to this, wherever. I don't think at the time it was like, just take your dog into the local woods and, anthropomorphize trees. It just, I had no basis. I had nothing to compare it to. So I thought, right, I'll just be me and see what happens. And I was just very lucky that, some people could sort of resonate with what I was doing and where I was and how I was talking about it.
I love that you refer there to the introversion, because in fact, I don't think I've come across a single person yet who is on YouTube in the creative sphere that isn't introverted. Creativity, right. I think, kind of holds itself, I guess, for introversion. It's our way of expressing ourselves. But then YouTube and, like you say, speaking to a camera, it's so much easier than speaking to a person. And, when I began for YouTube, I always lose track of how many years it's been. I think it was about 7 years ago now. But I was painfully shy back then. Like I couldn't speak to anybody, really. My social skills were so bad. But speaking to a camera was just, it gave me a voice, and it allowed me to voice kind of what I was interested in and what I wanted to do with my life and my connection to nature. And through doing that over the years, I've now grown in confidence in my personal life as well, to be able to do things like this, But it's incredible, because there is that I find a lot of people who are on YouTube are introverts, and it gives us a voice. It helps us to get out there and gives us that connection. And I love that you spoke a little bit there about Tom's story as well, because it's nice to see that we're kind of not alone in that. It's it's brilliant.
That's what I've seen in him as well, is that it's almost like I think for some people they do create a bit of a persona that is a little bit different to. I didn't feel as if I did that, but I've seen it in others where the person that they are on YouTube is a bit, I think, fundamentally the same, but in terms of how they present themselves is a bit different to how they are in real person. I don't think that's them trying to be someone who they aren't. I think in a lot of cases it's them trying to be the person they want to be. And I think that's what I saw in Tom, is like, he wanted to be more confident. He wanted to be more, not extrovert, but you know what I mean? And with time, he has, and is far, far more confident now, and much more kind of chatty and fun in person, etc. And I am as well, way more confident. I remember when I did my first kind of ticketed presentation. God, I felt sick, absolutely sick to the stomach. And I was just frantically reading everything that I'd written down for the presentation, just trying to memorize everything because I was so frightened I was going to just screw it all up. And that takes years to get on top of that, where you can just stand in front of a group of people and you know what you're talking about. You really do. You know, you'll know what you're talking about when you're doing a presentation about photography, but it still doesn't take away that element of doubt that you're going to slip up and say something stupid. And it takes a while to build up that confidence. It really does.
Yeah, definitely. I love that you've both experienced that as well, that kind of increase in confidence that it's given you. I almost feel like when we're creating videos for YouTube, it's like we're showing the person that we kind of want to be. Like when we're in that kind of introverted, quiet, shy self before we evolve, it's like we were showing the person we wanted to be. And I know that was definitely my case. It's like I was voicing and showing the person that I didn't feel able to do in kind of the kind of personal life. It was giving me that as well. I love that you've managed within your own work though to stay kind of authentic and to yourself and kind of genuine throughout the whole process. And I love that you almost said, you know, no, I'm going to be this guy who goes out into the woods with my dog and just does woodland because it's me. Because I think it's very easy to fall into that almost trap of trying to follow what we're told will do well, but actually when we're true to ourselves, that's when people relate to us because they can tell it's genuine. And that's one thing I've always felt with your videos is you can really see the genuine guy behind the camera. You know, you're not trying to be someone you're not or photograph things that don't interest you. You're very much, this is me, I'm Simon, I'm in the woods with my dog, and this is where I want to be.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, you know, I could have tried to follow trends and, you know, beat the algorithm or, you know, do more gear videos or divisive videos or what, you know, and I could have had, you know, 10 times the subscribers I have now, but to what end? Because the thing is that you know, you've got to respect your roots. You know, you've got to respect, you know, how you came to be a photographer. Because if you lose sight of that, then I think it's a slippery slope. And that's the thing is like there's been one or two moments where I've thought, oh God, you know, is the passion just sort of slipping away? And it isn't really. You're just in a bit of a lull, but you nip it in the bud, and everything's fine again. But for me, I have to protect that because if you lose that, then it's game over. Because it will show. It will show in the videos. It will show in your work. It will, you know, make you hate photography. I would think. So yeah, I'm quite precious about that. So yes, you know, I did a trip in January which didn't involve any trees whatsoever, which was fun and creatively challenging. But yeah, I was still quite happy to get home and get back in the local woods, to be honest.
That's so beautiful to see because it's very humble and people can definitely relate to that. So yeah, it's lovely. And I guess I'm kind of moving forwards now that you've had your exhibition and everything. Have you got any exciting plans moving forwards, or are you just going to keep enjoying what you're doing?
I'd say it's been weird this year because I had my book. In a very short space of time after that, we had the exhibition, which sort of seemed to swallow up most of last year in some form or another. And then in January, I had a big trip overseas. And then after that, I felt quite lost, to be honest, because I just felt as if I had sort of 2 or 3 major things, but I didn't really have the foresight to kind of plan something for immediately after all that had finished. And to be honest, my back, I've really struggled with it this year for whatever reason. I don't know why. Probably I just haven't been in the woods enough. I have things in mind now, and I would like to work towards another book, but I have to be absolutely certain about what that book's going to be. And I'm not a person that's going to, you know, check out a book as often as I can. I think this next book will be kind of 3 years away, something like that. But I'm trying to find something which, because my first book was very kind of autobiographical as well. You know, a strong focus on local, but about kind of my story, how I think and feel about the woods. Whereas I think the next one I don't think will have that autobiographical approach. I think it will be very, very much about the woods and not me. And I think that's the way it should evolve, because I think there's a lot more to say there that anyone can connect with. As to how that's going to look, I don't know yet. But I'm not. I honestly, I kind of just go with the flow, and just things have a habit of just evolving and falling into place. And I think those things happen when you just enjoy what you're doing. If you're kind of frantically trying to grab at things, hoping that something sticks, then that's when it's tricky. I usually just like the time, even if it just takes all year, as long as I can pay the bills. If that just sort of results into something that I really can get my teeth into, then I'm happy.
Definitely. I mean, they say when you're in the flow and you just do. No, it's good though, because I think it's good as creatives not to always have things that we're working towards in this right moment, because I think these moments of quiet and these lulls and these rest times, I like to call them, they're where we can kind of get back to ourselves, do other work around it, just enjoy the process. And I love that you spoke there about being in the flow and just enjoying what you do, because I and a lot of people say when you're in the flow and you just enjoy what you're doing and enjoy life and kind of follow your dreams, even on an internal level, things just come and everything happens when the time's right. So this beautiful book about woodlands will just happen when the time's right. So yeah, it's exciting. I look forward to seeing how that potentially progresses in the next 3 years. Thank you so much for your time today, Simon. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And for anybody that doesn't already connect with you and your work, where can they go to find you?
All the usual stuff. YouTube, Baxter.photos, www.baxter.photograph. Can't even get my own website address right. All the W's, Baxter.photos is my website, and then there's links there to sort of Instagram, Facebook. Don't really bother with Twitter so much. And now we've got a new one, haven't we? Threads. I mean, come on.
I saw something today about that on Instagram, but I've not looked into it. Goodness knows what that's all about.
Oh yeah, I've signed up and I just think, do I really need this? But yeah, I'm on Threads now as well. We'll see. Time will tell. See what happens there.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally more social media. A bit quiet on Twitter these days. On Vero. Oh God, there's Vero as well.
Yeah.
I can't keep up with it all.
No, I started Vero and then I was like in it for a few weeks and then I just dropped off. It's just like you were saying about being on your phone a lot and stuff. I really struggle. And like YouTube is my consistent one, and I'll do Instagram as much as possible. Obviously the podcast is now my consistent weekly thing as well, but trying to keep up with everything else, it's just, you'd spend your whole life on your phone and social media if you did it all, wouldn't you? So it's about, I think, being very, just kind of thinking a lot now, isn't it, about which ones we want to actually put our time and effort into and which ones are worth it for our own journey. So, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant. Well,
thank you very much for having me. That's gone quickly, hasn't it?
It has. I know. Time flies when you're having fun. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Simon. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me. Very enjoyable.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this week's podcast. It really does mean the world to me. If you'd like to get further involved with the Photographic Connections community, you can find all the details at photographicconnections.com. And now that this podcast has come to an end, there's only one thing left for you to do. It's time to pick up your camera and head outdoors. There's so many incredible photographic opportunities just waiting for you to discover.